Hi, I'm Mark Hoebee, Paper Mill's producing artistic director. Welcome to Babbling by the Brook. Recently, we announced a revised lineup for our 2020-2021 season, and that meant having to postpone our highly anticipated production of The Wanderer to our 21-22 season. I'm so excited to bring this world premiere musical to the Paper Mill stage, and today I am joined by director Kenneth Ferrone and book writer Charles Messina to give us a preview of this blockbuster hit based on the life and music of Dion. Hi guys, thanks for being here with us.
Hey Mark, thanks for having us.
Hey Mark.
How are you? So happy to have you here to talk about this really exciting project, a show that I've come to truly fall in love with. Actually, I was talking this morning to Patrick Parker, who's our associate artistic director, and he's actually the one who brought the show to my attention. He had attended the workshop that you guys did. I think it was at Baryshnikov Studios.
Yep.
He and I usually try to go to, new shows together, but we get a lot of invitations. So he went to this one on his own, and he was telling me that at intermission, two things happened. One, Jill Menza, Charles, your producing partner, the lovely Jill Menza, came up to him at intermission and introduced herself and said what her connection to the show was, and said she was a Jersey girl and that she knew about Paper Mill, was excited that he was here. And then the second thing that happened was he went to the men's room, and I guess in the men's room it was full of all these Dion fans who were talking about, wow, man, this show's going to New York, it's going to Broadway, it's the best thing I've ever seen. And all that was only halfway through the show. And then he saw Act Two and really loved it, came back to the theater. And I think maybe it was Jill who reached out to him and said, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And Patrick actually did share some thoughts at that time about, his reaction to the show. And he said, I'd love to get this material to me, our artistic director. And so you guys had done a pretty high quality videotape of that workshop.
Yeah.
And I watched it and really thought, wow, there's something terrific and special here. And so then we started on this journey. And before we leave Jill, who's just fantastic, she's from Livingston, I think. Is that right? Somewhere in the Jersey.
Yeah, she's a northern New Jersey girl.
Northern Jersey,
yeah.
right
Yeah.
here. So Patrick and her had an instant connection, and I remember meeting her too, and she's just so energetic and a terrific person to be around and loves this show. But
Yeah.
Backing up, Charles, how did all this come to be? How did the project, how did you give birth to this thing?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I would have to rewind to about 2012, maybe 2012. It's actually someone who had seen some of my other work. She'd come to other shows, and she was just an audience member. And then she had seen one of my shows. I think it was the Mercury show, which was a show we did some years ago about Freddie Mercury, that I had written, and she'd come to see it a bunch of times. This particular person, Leah, her name is Leah. Give her name, put her name out there. She's wonderful, so supportive. But she became a friend, and she had said to me, "Hey, there is another musical bio that you have to do." And I said, "Really? What is it?" And she said, "Oh, I can't tell you now, but I will tell you." And I think it was almost like yeah, it's true. She left it as a bit of a mystery. Then about a year later, she contacted me and said, "You should write the story of Dion." And I said, "Dion and the Belmonts?" And she said, "Yeah, do you know?" I said, "Well, of course I know Dion and the Belmonts. Dion, I grew up with the music, Italian-American from New York, the same thing." And she said, "I'm going to have you guys meet, and talk and see if it's a good connection." Because there had been some others who had taken a stab at his life story in the past for screen, mostly for screen, not for stage. And when I met him, we met at a Chinese restaurant down in the Village, which is a very Italian-American thing to do. Right? You got to have Chinese food. And so we hit it off. I thought that we hit it off, really, really well, really quick. We had a shorthand for each other as Italian-Americans, New Yorkers. And he had been burned, on having people not tell his story the way he felt it should have been told. And so he put a little bit of trust, he took a little bit of a leap. And, I just set out to write it, spec thing, just did it, he and I, just to see how it would feel. We did a small reading at a theater uptown, about 100 people, nothing, Jill wasn't involved. I mean, Kenneth wasn't involved. This was really early in the process, and he watched this reading, and he, with Susan, and his manager Dick, who he trusts very much, and a couple other invited guests, about 100 people, and he was like, "Yeah, I think this is different. I think this isn't what other people were trying to do." So that kind of hooked him, and then we just kept developing it, just kept talking, just kept working it. And a couple years later, ran into Jill, who came to see something else of mine. Actually, was introduced to me through a manager friend, and Jill was like in love with this project. She really is. You said it earlier, Mark. Jill is cheerleader, producer, everything. She's the engine, in some ways, the motor that keeps us going on the harder days. Yeah, but that was basically the origin of it. Just having this personal connection to Dion through a mutual friend.
And Kenneth, how did you come onto the project?
I met with Charles and Jill. I was brought in. They were looking to bring on a director, and they had already done, as Charles mentioned, a number of readings and had a really great script in a good place. And I think I was introduced through our general managers, and I met a great little place downtown with Charles and Jill, and we sort of
Was it Chinese? Was it for Chinese food?
Wasn't Chinese, but it was this really great tea place that isn't there anymore.
I know.
Oh.
I mean, Charles and I did half our work. I feel like
Yeah.
that was our, you get your spot, and that's like your creative, you're in your
Yeah.
zone. So a lot of the
For
show
sure.
materialized there in that little
Sure.
corner of Soho. But we had a great meeting, and going into it, I grew up with Dion's songs, listening to the radio, and I grew up with my grandparents who listened to it often, and I knew The Wanderer and Teenager in Love and Runaround Sue and all of those great hits. But you have a preconceived notion of the period, I think, in the 50s and doo-wop, and it wasn't until I really started talking and looking at the material and reading the script that you really started to get a sense of, oh no, this is about so much more in Dion's life, and being a kid from the streets of the Bronx, from that small enclave of that Italian Catholic neighborhood at that period. And it just was really exciting, and something I was excited to explore with them, and we sort of continued from there. We worked on the script. We did a reading, like a 2-week reading. I guess that was about 2 years ago now. For a small audience uptown at Symphony Space. I say it was a small reading, but we actually had a full, I think, 4 or 5 piece band.
Yeah.
It's rock and roll. There's something about this music. It so contributes to the tone of the overall piece. So we learned a lot from that. And then again, to Charles and Jill's credit, I got a call. That was like May, and come June or July, I was down in Washington, D.C. working on a show, and I get a call, and they said, we want to do a workshop, and I was expecting, great, 6 months from now, because in the theater, everything gets scheduled, you're always looking a year ahead, and they're like, oh no, we want to do it, in a couple months, and it was like, what? Okay. It's so rare that the development of a show moves that quickly, but I personally love it because you have momentum, you already have the thoughts moving, and you're able to keep, creatively working. So thanks to their support, before long we were there doing the workshop. And, you were referencing it earlier, but I like to call it our off-Broadway production, because we did a lot more than you often do in a workshop, because usually a workshop, as you know, you want to focus on the script and the text and developing the characters and what are those relationships. And we did all of that, but we were also adding an element of small scenic pieces. We would have a staircase that would stand in for a stoop, and we had minimal costume pieces and some lighting even. And I was trepidatious at first, but it was really great, because what we were able to do is we were able to begin developing with the design team a visual language and how to tell this story. And we learned just as much from that, in addition to the actual rehearsal period and the time to, jump into a room with actors. So so that was then, and that's when, as you mentioned, Patrick came, and then he passed it along to you, and the rest is history. Here we are.
It is so funny because in talking to our audiences and patrons, supporters about new works, right? You know, people sit down at a show either here at Paper Mill or in New York, and they see that end product, but they don't really know how much time goes into getting it to that point, right? And I say, and I don't even know where I heard it, but someone said once that from page to stage, right? From the when it's written and done, you think, till you get your first major production, it's like can be up to 7 years, like 7 years page to stage. So the idea of something on a roll and moving quickly can go one of two ways. We've all seen those projects that feel rushed, like you're like, this could have used another production or another workshop. But sometimes, like you say, if you're on a roll and things are cooking and they're moving ahead good, you want to capitalize on that energy, the momentum, like ride the wave, right?
Right.
So when Patrick sent me that link to the video, same thing. I was like, okay, I've seen a million workshops in person and on video that are basically people at music stands, you know, maybe a little involvement. This was like full on the off-Broadway production. There were set pieces, there were costumes, there was a band, it was like a full cast. But like you said, for me too, not having been in the room to experience it, watching that much really gave me a sense and a flavor about how you guys saw the show. And we should talk about it too, because Dion's journey, personal and career-wise, is fascinating. And I don't know that people really know it, because like when I think of Dion, I think of him in that, you know, Fabian age of like pretty boy, front man for like, you know, a boy band of the era, right? Which it's true, that's what he was, but it's only part of who he was, not where he came from, not what he went through, and certainly not where he wound up. So just, Charles, talk a little bit about his artistic journey, you know, like where he started as a kid and then, you know, where he wound up.
Yeah, I think it's important. That's a good point, Mark. Dion's trajectory is interesting because he really, you know, a street kid from the Bronx, tough gang member, tough kid, you know. Dion's a tough kid. He's a tough man. He's a tough guy. He's a New Yorker through and through, you know, consummate New Yorker, but an unbelievable artist in his heart. And I think part of that was the struggle. I remember early on saying to Dion, will you talk about the drugs? You know, can we talk about the drugs? We got to talk about the drugs. And he was like, yeah, I'll talk about the drugs, you know, because you have to talk about the drugs.
And
you have to.
So we know, or people that know him know that he struggled with a drug addiction and came out on the other side of it. But it started very early in his life.
Oh, very early. The Dion,
young teen, right?
Yeah, well, that's part of the you know, that's part of that, you know, I use this word a lot with Kenneth, the deconstruction. You know, our show takes on the 50s and it delivers on the you know, the Grease era. It delivers on, you know, the majesty of the 50s, the, you know, iconography of the 50s, but it deconstructs it so that ultimately we see that behind that perfectly coiffed DA haircut and that perfectly crafted image that was, you know, pasted all over the world for every teenage girl to love, was this soul that was, you know, tragedy at the heart of it, was this addiction that was eating him alive. And I think that's really part of the strength of our show. So we deliver on all the fun stuff, and yet you know, hopefully we also have those complexities, that human story that we follow. I think that's maybe part of the trick here.
I think it is. I think balancing all of those pieces, the Dion that people remember or that they see in that, like the height of his stardom, and also telling the story of, just like you said, what was going on behind the facade. It was kind of this manufactured look placed on him that he was fighting constantly. And you talk early in the book about how he just wanted to be a folk singer and play the guitar by himself and sing songs, and they kept taking the guitar out of his hands and saying, no, stand at the mic and sing, learn the choreography. And that was one fight, right? A creative fight
Yeah, he wanted to
between.
be Hank Williams. He wanted to be Hank Williams. They wanted him to be Frank Sinatra or Bobby Darin or, whatever the flavor was at
Yeah.
the moment.
And so he was dealing with that creatively. Then he was also dealing with this addiction problem that started early in his life and followed him for a long, long time. And then there was a major tragedy in his life when he was achieving fame, and it's where the show begins. And it's fascinating to me because it's something I'd never heard. So kind of talk a little bit about that moment.
Well,
You know,
so many, it is the lens, I believe, into our story for those who don't fully know who Dion was, but we all know in sort of the iconography and lore of early rock and roll, February 3rd, 1959, which became known as the day the music died. And that's when Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson, otherwise known as the Big Bopper, perished in a plane crash. What a lot of people don't realize is that there were 4 headliners on that tour. It was the Winter Dance Party tour, touring around the Midwest on a broken down bus in the dead of winter. And Dion and the Belmonts were the 4th headliners on that tour. And you can still find the poster from the Winter Dance Party and see that just equally billed with their right alongside Buddy Holly and Ritchie Valens is Dion. And Dion, they eventually could only fit 3 in the plane along with the pilot. And so they tossed a coin, and sort of the fate was determined in that coin toss. Now, the irony of it is that Dion actually won the coin toss and ended up giving up his seat to Ritchie Valens, who had a cold. But it was also because Dion at that point in his life felt very guilty. The price of a plane ticket was the same amount that his parents paid rent in the Bronx. And again, he came from a small, tenement house
it was like $30 or something.
Yeah, Charles, do you know how much it was?
36.
Yeah,
$36.
I remember that. I remember that from the script.
Dion gave up the ticket, got on the bus, took the bus there, and it wasn't until the next morning, arriving at the next stop, that he heard that he had lost his 3 friends who he had really become close to. And, just to put yourself in that position and to also think about Dion continued with the tour. Like, he continued performing. He did a show the following night without them. And so, that was just one of the many struggles he was already dealing with that led to addiction. But that was almost another catalyst that threw fuel on the fire. And you didn't have any therapy. You didn't have recovery centers. You didn't have people to talk to. And that's something we really, Charles has written so beautifully into his script, is that penting up and holding all those feelings and emotions, and turning to other substances as your outlet and as your relief. And I think it's something a lot of people can identify with today as well.
Right. I mean, absolutely. Just add it up. A street kid in New York City, introduced to drugs early, finding some kind of light stardom, but then it's squelched. Artistic fighting, between that, and then this major issue with, when he's rising to fame, this tragedy and the guilt that then he carries, which he talks about, you talk about in the script as well, about not being on that plane and having to be the survivor of that group. And so, yes, the addiction takes over, and he does have one major safety valve. And Charles, you alluded earlier to Susan. Can you just tell us who Susan is?
Yeah, Susan is Dion's wife, longtime wife. I'm forgetting the years at this point, but it's well over 50. I think maybe 55 years or 56 years at this point, and she's just a mainstay and a rock. And truly, even within the story and in the show, she really is that bedrock of consistency and support and love for him. Because stardom isn't the elixir. Dion and I talk about it often, and he really appreciates the idea that this show isn't about someone who, isn't famous and then becomes famous and then everything is great again because he's famous. He's famous, getting famous or just about famous when we meet him in the show. He's certainly a local hero. and he has his little jukebox hits, which then become big, American Bandstand hits, which then become legendary songs. But none of that cured it. None of that was a fix, till he found Susan, who had come from a challenged background herself, with a father who had challenges with addiction and alcohol. So she was a savior for him, and I think I'm comfortable saying that, not just based on the script, but based on knowing her, knowing him, and how he feels about her. Dion often says, if you want to know me, talk to Susan. So she's a great character, and vital part of the story.
And amazing because she's stuck beside him. They had this relationship and love, and it even plays out. We see her struggles with her father. We see their backgrounds. We see them come together, and then we watch as their relationship goes on this rocky road too, where she almost walks out because of, she also can't deal with the shrapnel from his, explosive issues with everyone around him. And his manager leaves, his bandmates leave, and eventually I can't remember how it happens, but he comes to AA, right?
Yeah, I mean, he does. And the fascinating thing about Susan, which we deal with in the story, but it's also, taken from real life. There's not a false note in the script, because, I had these sources of information. I didn't have to make anything up. It was there, But that she actually went to recovery meetings, and at first to take care of her, which is really, Kenneth and I talk about it, and we've talked about it a lot. That's a very strong statement to make for a woman, in the 1950s and 60s. It was the 60s, to say, I'm going to get help for me.
Right.
And then ultimately he followed her lead, but that she did it first, we think is a really empowering message.
That's
very much so.
I remember that now. It's all coming back to me. Yes.
Yeah, Charles has given her in his writing, such a great sense of agency for her character as herself.
Yeah.
And Chrissy Altamar, who played the role, brings such a sense of empathy to it, but also that strength to make that decision and come to that decision on her own. And again, as Charles said, it's stories that both Dion and Susan have said in their own words. And I should mention, we have the benefit that both Dion and Susan are with us and have been to these readings, and Dion has been in rehearsals with us, which is really great, because to hear it firsthand, that's something a lot of people working on these biographic shows don't always have the luxury of actually having, the individual there. And so I think that really seeped through the creative process into Charles' writing, and also into the cast and their performances.
And we should talk about the cast in a minute. I want to, but I think two things. One is kudos to Susan and Dion for the courage to actually tell the true, raw, real story, because that is what clearly comes through in Charles's book and in the way you've directed it, Kenneth, and the way we as an audience receive it. And to watch Susan at that time, now as I'm thinking back, take that proactive step to take care of herself first, and knowing that there are demons that he deals with that she cannot wrestle with. There are things he has to deal with. And yet there's still a stigma around addiction and alcoholism and the people who live with it who aren't the addict. And there's a stigma around taking care of yourself. And so that is a great message that comes through this piece that's actually happened, 40 years ago, right? And you'd think we'd be farther along, but kudos to the two of them for being so courageous and brave. And I'm sure part of that is they want to tell the story so that other people see you can get to the other side. But before we go on more in the story, let's take a minute to talk about the cast, because you mentioned Christy, who we know from Anastasia, who is fantastic, Christy Altamar in the show. And very unassuming at the beginning. She shows up and she's just moved to New York City from the Midwest.
Vermont.
Vermont. I knew it was somewhere not.
Wait, Charles has to give you my favorite line, the Dion's response to Vermont.
Which one? Just remind me, because
The
if they have
tree.
trees, they have trees. Oh no, Dion likes to give a line reading on that, because there's a line in the show, Mark, where he's there when he first meets her. Here's this like New York street kid from the Bronx meeting this girl from Vermont, wide-eyed. Here she is moving to the Bronx, and they're talking. She says she's from Vermont, and he says, "Oh, yeah, I know where Vermont is. That's where they got trees, right?" But Dion wants Mike Wartella, who's awesome, who plays our Dion. We love Mike Wartella, but he wants Mike to hold the line and say trees, and then look out into and we get such a kick out of that, because Dion that's the only line reading Dion's ever given, and it's on that line. So
He gets one. That's totally cool.
he gets that. If he wants that one, he can have that one. That's fine.
And we just talked about Michael Wartella.
Yeah.
Brilliant guy, amazing in this part. He just starred as Mickey Rooney in Chasing Rainbows for us earlier in the season, and such a talented guy.
And such a chameleon. For your audiences to have seen him up there, tap dancing and leaping off of desks as Mickey Rooney, and here he's this tough, street kid from the Bronx. It's such a different role, and he so fully has thrown himself into it. And with every iteration and reading and workshop, the depth of character he's just gone further and further, and spending time with Dion, he's been able to pick up little mannerisms while still creating a character of his own, capturing the essence of Dion, which I think is great, as opposed to falling into any sort of imitation.
Yeah, not at all. And then the other part of that triangle is Joey Mcintyre from New Kids on the Block, who he is such a great actor and performer. I mean, I know he's been in Waitress and a lot of other Broadway stuff, but he is so fantastic in the show. I can't say enough great things about him. And he plays Johnny.
He plays Johnny, yeah. Dion's buddy. Dion's friend.
He plays
Johnny's
Dion's buddy.
friend. He likes to get into a lot of trouble with until it sort of turns sour. But and the camaraderie that Mike and Joey have found, and all the little moments and all of that nuance, it's like a true bromance, which is something you don't see in musical theater. And here you have two New York street kids, and they just like electrify that stage when
they're completely believable as best buddies, traveling through from being kids on the street all the way through the stardom, through the problems, through Dion's ups and downs and all of that. It's fantastic. But I wanted to loop back for a second to Christy, because she's so good, because at the beginning she seems like this quiet, meek little girl, kind of lost in the big city, and then grows into this incredibly strong woman who almost steps away, doesn't ever leave him, steps away to take care of herself, and then is there with him at the end of where the show ends. Certainly the journey doesn't end, but where Dion finally settles in peacefully with himself as a person and artistically. And another shocker moment, just as shocking to me as The Day the Music Died, is the last song that he sings in the show. And Charles, can you talk a little bit about what that moment is?
Yeah, well, Dion's catalog really has some amazing surprises in it, doesn't it? For me, I know, right? For me, when I was first, I had known a lot of the doo-wop stuff just from growing up in the city, and my family would listen to it and all that. And I think everybody knows The Wanderer and Run Around Sue. Those are indelible. And, I Wonder Why might be one of the great, if not the greatest doo-wop song ever. But then as you really peel away Dion's catalog, you start to find things like Ruby Baby, which you figure, oh my God, yeah. Like Bruce Springsteen has said that's like one of his favorite songs, and it's an amazing song. But the trajectory of this story really is the iconic teenage star growing into adulthood, overcoming addiction, meeting Susan, and taking that bridge. So our story takes place from 1957, 58 to 1968, 69. And I just thought it was great to end it. And I think Kenneth agrees with this, just to end it where that part of the journey ended, which was a live performance of um, Abraham Martin and John, on the Smothers Brothers show in 1968. And the greater significance of that, really, which I didn't even know Dion sang that song, honestly, when I
I
first,
didn't either.
right, I did not know
Until
that
I
was
saw
Dion.
the workshop tape, I was
Yeah.
like, that was Dion?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
knew that song.
I
I
know,
could sing it to you right now, but I had
I
no
know.
idea that it was Dion.
When I first was looking, going back a couple of years now, because I knew sooner than that, but but it was amazing because I said, oh my God, this song, and we played around. Kenneth can tell you, we played around with other possible endings because we fell in love with the catalog. I mean, the catalog stretches into the present day. I mean, he's still
Yeah.
doing music with, his new album is #1 on the blues charts. I mean,
Yeah.
so this is not a guy who has a shortage of music. And also, just one thing about the music in this show, it's the diversity of music. We're going from early doo-wop to some pop hits that he had in there, but also some heavy duty rock stuff, rockabilly stuff, blues, gospel. I mean,
And it's all his music.
and it's all his music,
All
which is
his.
amazing.
Yeah.
But the significance of Abraham Martin and John as the final song, first of all, it delivers because people love the song. But aside from that, is the first time he ever performed sober live. And we say that in the show, obviously, and it hits like a ton of bricks. I think that ending, and it really lands.
It
really
absolutely
beautifully.
does. It's a
Yeah.
very quiet moment between Susan and Dion right before he goes out. I'll never forget that. And she's like, "What are you so nervous? What are you so nervous about?" And he goes, "I think this is the first time I'm ever going to perform sober."
Yeah.
And then that just colors how, because then I've gone back and Googled that
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
tape, right, to look at it and you think about it. But the other thing is, finally, his journey as an artist goes full circle back to the beginning of the show,
Yeah. Yeah.
which was his dream and his desire just to be alone with a guitar, telling a story through music in kind of a folk style, this quiet, calm artist and his music. And that's what that song is. I think it's the perfect way to end this piece. And I keep wanting to say that because it's just one chapter in his incredible journey.
Yeah.
It's beautifully, beautifully handled.
Oh,
Really.
thank you. I appreciate that. We do feel it. There's a chill up the neck at that
Yeah.
moment. Even in rehearsals, I've felt it many times because it does feel like a complete journey. And it's about an 11, 12-year journey of his life. And of course it went on, musically it went on from there. And but that, yeah, it just feels right. When something feels right, it just felt right.
And one of the things we keep exploring is the sense of community surrounding Dion throughout the story, and also the fabric of the country. He is such an indelible part, and was and still is a part of America and the United States and what we are and our culture and our society. And to sort of follow his story in terms of his rise in the 50s and that perfectly manicured era, and when teenagers themselves were just becoming a commodity, they were consumers, and it was the first time America was sort of discovering that. And then as his life became more tumultuous and then he fell into more addiction and all of his issues, was as our counterculture, and we went into the 60s and the nation was starting to find its voice, and ultimately leading to protests and turmoil and all of those events surrounding it, and ultimately with the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Kennedy and all of that. And what Dion always wanted to do was affect people, and affect is what he did with that song with Abraham Martin and John. And it became a healing anthem for a nation that was hurting. And even seeing the events of this past year, again, it holds a mirror up to where we've been as a country and where we still have to go. And it seems to just, it doesn't lose its relevancy. And I think it's sort of what makes the story universal, and also touching on a number of levels.
I agree. And first of all, I can't thank you guys enough for being here today and sharing this with me and our audience. And I'm so excited to get the show up on our stage. And it works on so many levels, not only Dion's story, but what the country has gone through. It's about redemption. It's about community. It's about, a phoenix rising from the ashes, or what seemingly is the ashes, and second chances. It's about so much. And it's also, that last moment is so poignant because it's about, icons of justice and humanity that have been lost. And it's a moment we're in right now again, and the country is looking at itself, and like we did then, and we must do better. We must do better. And that's one of the things I think that's so great about this show, is it gives you hope, right? It gives you hope that through love and understanding and with community working together, there's a better life for all of us. Those are great lessons to walk out of a musical with, right?
Thank you,
Sure.
Dion.
Thank you. Yeah, we got to say thank
story.
you to Dion and to the entire company that's going to be working with us on the show, and everybody. And I just can't wait to get into a studio with you guys, with the company, and get it up on its feet, which will happen sometime soon. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Take care.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Babbling by the Brook. And please join me again next week when I catch up with the wickedly funny actor and director, Don Stevenson, from the Paper Mill Productions of 1776, The Producers, Lend Me a Tenor, and more. See you then.